Our guest today is a second time interviewee on the program. Welcome back to the show, Andrew Blake from Cerulli Associates. Andrew, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Dan. Great to be a second time guest as well. It's been awesome to see how this podcast has really taken off over the last few years, and you've been getting a great audience, great guests. So it's not only been informational to me being a in the research area and asset management, et cetera, but yeah, it's great to just see how much backing you're finally getting because it's quality stuff, and there's not a lot of not a lot of stuff out there covering these topics.
I went back to the recording we did, which is insane that it was 3 years ago. But at the time, you were about to set up the nursery and the crib for your son. And now you've got a 3 year old, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went from trying to figure out how to build a crib to now trying to figure out how to keep him from jumping off the top step or jumping off the back of the couch. So different battles, but yeah, it's been an absolute joy to be a parent, and I've really loved it.
For the audience that's new, or maybe they didn't hear the first episode, maybe they're new to the industry, new to the podcast. Can you give them just a quick rundown on Cerulli Associates, the work you do, and how you intersect with asset management and distribution?
Cerulli is a 30-year-old private research and consulting company, really specializing in all things kind of asset and wealth management coverage. We have four different primary practices: our wealth management team, we have a retirement team, an institutional team, and a product development team. I myself sit on our wealth management team and head up two different reports here. Our US Intermediary Distribution Report, which we're going to be talking about today, that's looking at all things asset managers are doing to try and engage financial advisors. And we also have a distribution survey, which hopefully we can garner some additional participation on through this, but that goes out to distribution team members at asset managers of all different sizes and product lineups, asking them about their strategies for engaging advisors, what's working, what they're thinking about in the future. So really just anything that they can do to put their best foot forward in front of financial advisors. I also head up our advisor metrics, which is really just an in the weeds look at all things advisor practices. So through those two lenses, I have a pretty comprehensive understanding and coverage of what's going on in the wealth management space and how asset managers are evolving their business to put their best foot forward.
To sum that all up, for those listening on the road or in the gym, maybe on the sales desk, Andrew and Cerulli know their stuff. What our goal with this episode will be is to extract just a couple of interesting nuggets or data points and trends that are impacting the day-to-day sales and distribution team. First topic is one that anybody selling needs to understand, and that's the advisor headcount. Where are advisors? What channels are they operating in? Anyone that's distributing funds, you're probably given a coverage that might include one channel versus the other. So I feel like this is the leadoff hitter in our lineup. You just get on base. You got to know this. Let's talk through some of the trends with advisor headcount.
Yeah, so we put out data that really shows the advisor headcount market share and their asset market share and compares and contrasts them. And in most cases across the various channels, and if anyone's new to the industry, we typically break them down in our retail lens at least through seven key channels. So the wirehouse channel, national and regional broker dealers, independent broker dealers, hybrid RIAs, independent RIAs, then insurance and retail bank broker dealers as two standalone categories as well. So when we think about where advisors are, thinking about just from a headcount perspective, and then how much assets they have in relation to how many advisors are operating in those channels. Typically, that's a fairly even ratio across the board. Number of advisors, number of headcount that's going in their assets that are fairly equivalent. But there's a couple channels where there's some key differences right now. So wirehouse advisors make up about 15% of total advisors right now, but they still hold 33% of assets within the industry. So a huge leap up there. And really what this is due to is the wirehouse channel's level of productivity. They continue to have a focus on high net worth oriented clients. That is a huge differentiator for them. When we go out and interview and or survey wirehouse advisors, we ask them, what's the biggest advantage of affiliating with your firm? What keeps you from going and operating independently? And year in and year out, we hear from these wirehouse advisors that having access to services and tools that are relevant to high net worth investors is the key thing that keeps them where they are. So the wirehouse has had an advantage of tailoring their service offerings towards that higher net worth advantage kind of earlier than some other firms really thinking about the need to move up market to have a more efficient advisor base, and they continue to have a stronghold on their relative proportion of clients that are in that kind of high net worth bucket. So again, only 15% of advisors in the wirehouse channel, but across all channels, they still hold a third essentially of the asset market share.
Yeah, I feel like the theme that we'll address with some of the slides that we go over here will just be where there seems to be like outliers amongst the other data sets, because you look at this and it's independent broker dealers and independent RIAs. They still have the highest share of advisor headcount, like 17.8, 17.3 respectively, but the assets just not nearly the size of the wirehouses.
Right. And it's understandable. It's hard to penetrate the wirehouse channel, especially if you're a boutique manager, you only have a couple strategies. It's really hard to both fund the ability to have your products even made available to their advisors, but also if you're trying to buy data packages, et cetera, it can be really cost prohibitive to play within that channel. But if you have strategies that are aimed or really tailored towards that high net worth type of end investor, the wirehouse channel is still a place that you need to be to take advantage of that opportunity versus conversely what we see in channels like the insurance broker dealer channel where they have a ton of advisors, but the relative asset market share does not match up to that.
The next topic we're going to move into is one that stood off the page immediately when I read this, so much so that you and I exchanged notes just like right when I went through this report. And this is a good chance to remind the audience. Obviously, most of you are probably listening in on podcast form, but we did just launch our internal use only YouTube channel. So go check that out, subscribe either when you get home or from the desk. You can catch short clips of all of our interviews. It's a good place to visualize some of the data we're talking about here. But this particular chart, I just need everyone who's listening to go and check out, because this one has to do with meeting times. So as I get this queued up, Andrew, why don't you just tell us what was the question that was posed, and we'll get through the data on the differences here.
Yeah, so this year we really looked into kind of the evolution of product specialists. We're hearing more and more from advisors that they want more technical expertise out of their asset management partnerships, whether that's from their wholesaler or having access to a product specialist. So we went out and asked both financial advisors what is the best time for them to meet with a product specialist. And we also asked that same question to members of asset managers. And advisors told us, nearly half of them, 47%, that they prefer an ongoing relationship with a product specialist. Now, only 19% of distribution team members felt the same way. And I thought that was a very unique difference of opinion. And it's showing that advisors are wanting to have cohesive discussions with product specialists that are a continuation of their previous interactions. And from my own experience working for a few different asset managers, the product specialist had long been seen as someone you can kind of just plug and play. Who's ever available to support the wholesaler at that time, at that meeting, is who's gonna take the call or take the meeting. Conversely, distribution team members have thought that's a great approach. It's just giving advisors access to expertise, but again, it's causing advisors to have to get reintroduced, waste time making those kind of small talk at the beginning of those meetings. Maybe they have to reiterate a couple things that they had in their previous meetings as well. But advisors want to know the name of their product specialist just like the same way they do as their wholesaler and start to build a relationship with them. They're not actually opposed to having another name and person that they're interacting with at an asset manager.
And the other data point that really made me chuckle is, again, we're like looking at differences between what advisors submitted and what asset managers or wholesalers did. And that is the best time for a discussion. So advisors report during the final stage before an allocation. So their answer to this was like 10%. So advisors say that 10% are interested in meeting or having a discussion like right before the final stages of an allocation. Whereas the distribution team members, they noted like 62%. So when I think through this, I'm chuckling because being in sales and distribution, you would think or you would hope that your most recent touch point is immediately before there's a decision that's going to be made. Like your goal is to get in front of them within the shortest amount of time before this is presented and actually funded. But it's so funny to see that being such a difference. So advisors are almost like, no, we're pretty good assuming we have a solid relationship and know what we need to do. Whereas wholesalers say, I need to be in the room or in the discussion as close to the allocation as possible.
Yeah, I think it really shows the evolution of how advisors are thinking about their interactions with wholesalers, et cetera. It's needing to provide that ongoing product expertise that can help justify their position from a fiduciary standpoint. And yeah, the asset managers have long seen, hey, this is a value add. We do have product specialists. We'll throw that out to you right before your big client meeting, and you can, but advisors are increasingly expecting that to be a consistent part of the relationship is that product expertise. So they don't want to be meeting someone that's giving them important information like that right before they meet with the client. It's kind of an ongoing value add now that's becoming more and more table stakes to have present.
All right, third hitter in our batting order here for some of the data we want to talk about. This one's really important. I'm in the process of doing the portfolio implementation micro credential through Kaya. It's really interesting just about how funds fit within an overall portfolio. And this is one of those trends that is really close, hits really close to home for everyone out there. Just when you think about how advisors actually allocate money and what they're putting into portfolios for various clients. So I thought I would carve out time to go over this because this does one of the better jobs of explaining the different methods and ways that advisors do that. If you are tuning in on YouTube, you'll be able to read this and check it out. But if you're not, just a couple examples. So creating custom portfolios for each client, using models developed by the team or their practice, using models, modifying home office models or custodian models. And I don't need to go through this line by line, but you kind of get the sense of what the practice is versus the portfolio construction. So when you look at some of this data, Andrew, does anything stand out to you, or do you reflect on anything in like year over year changes, or just how money's being placed by advisors?
Yeah, I think it brings to light a couple important questions here. So we break it down whether into three main buckets within each of those line items, kind of talking about whether the primary influence for portfolio construction is coming from within the practice, from their broker dealer or custodian, or from a total third party. And when we look at it through a few different lenses, one of them is kind of the core market. So what type of client does the advisor primarily focus on? So those focusing on higher net worth clients, think $2 million and up or so, they're much more likely to still be primarily influenced within their own practice. Our model use really take off over the past few years, and that's a great way that advisors are able to free up resources for professional development, bring more services within their practice. But I just want to reiterate that the opportunity for influence tends to be greater at those firms that are focusing on high net worth clients. And maybe if you'll jump up to 84 there, we look at this also through the lens of different channels. Advisors operating in the independent RIA channel, 82% of them report that their practice is the primary influence on their portfolio construction process. So 82% with advisors within the independent RIA channel say that our practice is how we're deciding how we're doing our portfolios, very little external influence. Whereas you look at the all advisors number, only 58% of all advisors say that their practice is the primary influence on their practice. So if you're working for an asset manager and you're just thinking about where you're going to have the greatest opportunity for an advisor to still be selecting their own investments and making those final decisions on implementation, it's very sensible that you would tailor your efforts towards the independent RIA channel. And that goes along with the obvious massive growth within the channel as well. And we don't see that trend really slowing down, whether it's advisors moving to the independent RIA channel to join one of the larger aggregator firms or to operate completely independently. Either way, those advisors are more likely to be constructing their portfolios in-house.
Take a look at that. That's huge numbers. 82% of the independent RAs are basically still up for grabs to work more directly with an asset manager as they try to think about where they're placing money for clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're moving through our batting order here. This is the cleanup hitter, batting fourth. I feel like this is obligatory to report on, but this is product mix changes. So we're looking at data. What was the product mix in 2025 versus expected in 2027? Big flow notices. Obviously, I think this maybe isn't unfamiliar to anybody, but right now there's an expected drop in mutual funds that would include liquid alternatives. There's a notable increase in ETFs. Anything else there like that's worth noting? I think that's been kind of a trend that we've all been seeing, but from this reported product mix changes, is there anything that stands out to you?
I think it's a fairly obvious trend throughout the industry that advisors are using mutual funds less in favor of ETFs, but it's really how rapidly that's starting to happen now. We've seen enough strategies be duplicated in ETF form, and advisors are increasingly struggling from a fiduciary perspective to justify the use of a mutual fund that has a similar strategy in ETF form. So, yeah, those things probably aren't a surprise, but I think the most useful information thinking about what advisors are telling us they're going to start using more of over the next couple years is separate accounts. The opportunity for customization there to better focus on tax optimization within the type of strategy is really something that advisors are telling us they want more of and they feel more comfortable using. And a couple of reasons for that are one, expense ratios have come down significantly for a lot of separate accounts. Technology has really enabled both asset managers to run those type of strategies more efficiently, and same thing for advisors. There's enough strategies or enough technology advancements where they can easily capture performance and bake it into their comprehensive view of a client's portfolio. It doesn't feel like this outlying line item in some cases anymore. So thinking about product development and what advisors are telling us they want more of, separate accounts and illiquid alternatives are really two that continue to advisors for moving their money there.
Let's talk a little bit about the alternatives because I feel like that's interesting. And I don't know when my episodes are all going to get launched. I just recorded yesterday with Axia, Chris Schelling, really fun episode that was a full deep dive on illiquid alternatives and how they fit to the retail portfolios. And this stat matches some of the stats that we chatted about, which is like, to me, it looks like the overall percentage of alternatives for, let's say, the average retail advisor and the retail client is still disproportionately low compared to all of these other vehicles, right? It's still not more than 10% of someone's portfolio. And I think that that makes sense. But even the increase that's expected here, it's money is going to go that way. It's just a matter of how much. I think that's what I think of as a salesperson, where even if it's smaller than I would think, it seems directionally that that's where more money will go in the door over the next few years. It's not declining, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, for all the noise around alternatives, and it's been a couple of years of this now, still only looking at the all advisors data point, there all illiquid alternatives represent only 2.4% of total portfolio allocations across all advisors. So it's really very little. And it's easy to see with that in mind why a lot of asset managers are focusing on the development of this strategy. There's a lot of room for adoption, especially from firms that have been less focused on the high net worth clients. They really haven't dabbled with something like this before. So it's obviously that some of those strategies can be a little bit more profitable too for asset managers. So it makes sense, but really the biggest thing advisors are telling us is they just need more education that they can then relay to their clients. They're very concerned about implementing something they are struggling to justify from a fiduciary perspective if they can't fully explain the risk profile of what they're investing in. And another hurdle to overcome there for asset managers is really just proactively discussing anything to do with kind of lockup periods. That is a totally new ball game for some advisors, and some of them just feel immediately uncomfortable when they hear that they're not going to be able to redeem anytime they want in some sense. So the need for education is really there. We're seeing value to a lot of portfolios that are implementing them, but it just comes down to how the asset managers can support advisors in evolving their product use around that.
Let's close this out here with a conversation about advisor challenges. Wholesalers' utility, a lot of the times, has to do with solving problems for advisors, whether those are investment related, whether it's helping them with various elements of their practice. So I feel like this chart documents very well like what are advisors dealing with. So I hope this helps illuminate some of the struggles that advisors are dealing with. That way wholesalers can either organize their resources or think about how they could address some of these specific things. So we've got new client acquisition is the number one challenge. I don't think anyone's going to be shocked by that. They got sales goals they got to grow too. Compliance and regulatory responsibilities. And the third one was managing technology needs. I thought that was interesting that it was that high up. I wonder to what degree we're talking about technology needs versus just like basic functionality and knowing how to use technology,
Yeah.
given the age demographic of our lovely advisor community. But in these top three, is has there been any changes year over year, or do you find these ones are fairly consistent?
New client acquisition year in and year out is the biggest challenge for advisors. And from a wholesaler perspective, how can you help advisors solve for their biggest challenge? We have all sorts of data to really get into on what resources are most valued by what wholesaler provided resources are most valued by financial advisors. We have a ton of information on the frequency of interaction, whether it's via email, webinar use. We have a lot of data on things like that. But ultimately, if you help advisors solve their biggest challenges, nothing is going to take your personal relationship with them to the next level more. So, new client acquisition right now for advisors is looking a little different than it ever has in the past. It's not the traditional forms of whipping out a phone book and going through and calling and just prospecting that way. It does not work. So, what's become really critical for advisors is their forming of strategic alliances with other professionals. And that by that I mean CPAs or estate planning attorneys are two of the most common ones. And a lot of times advisors are recognizing that they need to expand their number of services that they're offered. Retail clients are increasingly expecting their advisor to be able to account for their comprehensive financial picture, whether in-house or connecting them with someone else who can provide that tax expertise or whatever it may be. Wholesalers, your entire game here is out networking, making as many relationships as possible. And if you know some of these other professionals and can introduce them to an advisor who's looking to expand their capabilities, that's going to go a long way of justifying working with you as a close personal relationship. Secondarily, the compliance and regulatory responsibilities. I think that comes back to what we just talked about with alternatives and some of the hesitation there. Advisors are concerned about justifying things from their fiduciary standpoint, and they're concerned about some of the compliance regulatory issues with illiquid products. So, if you can help an advisor understand how this fits into their bigger picture, help them be able to justify it to their clients. You can help ease some of that burden. Some of that, we've seen this jump up as well, is because advisors are increasingly operating fully independent. So as they switch over their firm or maybe they transition to working as an independent RIA, they're now taking on the burden of managing compliance and regulatory responsibilities in a way that they weren't when they're working for a broker dealer.
I do want to talk about the fourth one, which is 28%, and that's building multi-generational client relationships. I feel like for almost 10 years now, we've just heard the phrase like the great wealth transfer and generations aging up and new millennials and Gen X's standing to inherit dollars. Can you highlight or illuminate anything behind that?
I think it's twofold. It's advisors recognize the importance of connecting with the children and spouses, especially of their primary relationships. But about 40% of the assets in the industry, so 37% of advisors or so, tell us that they plan to retire or transition their practice to someone else within the next decade. So with that in mind, they're thinking about the valuation of their practice and the continuity of it. Having those generational relationships is something that is really top of mind to make sure that others are understanding kind of what's going on within their practice, connecting with the younger clients. So when they try and move on from their practice or potentially sell it, whatever it may be, there is a strong connection to the next generation, and those current clients aren't just going to run away to a new advisor. So that's a tough thing for asset managers to really provide a lot of value on to advisors. But it's important to know that anything they can do to tailor their messaging around, hey, this is something that would be a great educational topic to introduce to one of your current client or to one of your current advisors to the children of their spouses or their spouses, that's something that they should do whenever possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really, especially on like the business valuation and the exit planning, given all the stats of retiring advisors, who takes over, what's the risk if the son of your longest tenured client, who's the biggest portion of your book that as the advisor you think is guaranteed to stay with you, can never say the G word in this industry. But what happens if the son just decides they want to go work with one of their friends who's a younger advisor that's helping them with financial planning and all this other stuff that they haven't been getting from you?
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, this is, yeah, there's a dose of reality as we wind down the conversation. And Andrew, anything else that you wanted to highlight either from this report or conversations that you're having that you think would make sense to the audience? I mean, we just gave them an absolute wealth of knowledge by previewing this. So I thank you and I thank Cerulli for making this available for us to give a preview to our audience. So those listening, if you want more, like I said, directly reach out to Andrew, find Andrew, talk about the reports available. There's a lot more than what we just covered, but anything to send the audience off with today, as from what I gathered, you're heading into warmer weather here. So give us something good, give us something positive on the way out.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate a couple of the top traits and resources that advisors value from wholesalers. I think it really ties back to our one of the initial data points we covered here on advisors telling us they prefer ongoing relationships with product specialists rather than kind of just the plug and play with whoever's available. When we ask advisors, what are the most valuable traits that a wholesaler can have? So, what is specific to that person, not necessarily the firm they're representing? And the top one, maybe it's a surprise, maybe it's not, but it is product expertise. And that's jumped up in the percentage of advisors who consider that an important trait year over year. There used to be a little bit more going towards things like firm resources or ability to support client events financially. But advisors increasingly have limited time and capacity to engage with asset management partners. So when they do, it's getting a little bit more straight to the point than it ever has in the history of our industry. They want to hear that product expertise. And that's significantly above what ranks second and third is accessibility, still as important as ever to be accessible to your advisors when they need you. Then third, the most valuable personal trait a wholesaler could have is a high level of capital market knowledge. Wholesalers tend to think that's a little bit more important than it is. Advisors are not necessarily going to turn to every asset manager for that kind of macroeconomic commentary, but it is still one of the top three personal traits a wholesaler could have. So on the flip side of that, we also go ask advisors about the most valuable resources that your wholesaler can bring to the table. And this can include things that come from the firm. And the top three there are competitive product information. And to see that at the top as the most valuable wholesaler resource is reiterating again that they are after product expertise and in their interactions with wholesalers. Second, and ranks very close to that, is best practices from other advisors. That goes back to the networking and the importance of hearing what competitors are doing and helping advisors tailor some of the tactical aspects of their practice to what their competitors are doing. And the third one that pops up is as far as most valuable resources from a wholesaler in the eyes of advisors is access to portfolio managers or product specialists, which that's something that's been a fast riser. That's never been in the top five, but that's again becoming increasingly table stakes and knowing that advisors want to get straight to the point, get that product expertise, justify what they're doing from a fiduciary standpoint, and all that other good stuff like taking me out golfing and providing support for client events is going to fall into place after that. So yeah, I just think it's interesting that advisors increasingly are telling us that that is critical to their willingness to work with an asset manager is getting that in-depth product expertise that they can then relay onto their clients.
It's funny to hear some of that data contrasted with a lot of the, I would say, like the narrative about wholesalers' relevance now. It's
Yeah.
like my perspective about it is that getting your foot in the door has a lot to do with non-product resources. It's a lot about assisting advisors with business development, running their practice, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, blocking and tackling, your goal is to help the advisors with the product knowledge. And you won't have success if you don't have that at the sake of some of these other things, right? It's interesting to contrast some of that narrative and some of the like hard data, which is like, no, I need you for this, and I need you to help me meet my fiduciary responsibilities, and I need you to be sharp and accessible and ready to talk about this when I need you.
Yeah, and I didn't enter the industry forever ago, within the last 13 years or so here. But at that time, as an internal wholesaler, I was still able to pick up the phone, get an advisor on the line,
Yep.
and then fund, a mutual fund based on the fact that it had 5 stars, and I'd list off the top 5 holdings and maybe the standard deviation, Sharpe ratio, and that was about it. And that's really not the case anymore. That's not breaking news to anyone listening to this podcast, but it really goes back to advisors and how they view their limited time to engage with asset management partners at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, the irony. They're doing less of the investment stuff themselves. Therefore, they need the other people, i.e., wholesalers, to have some of that expertise and knowledge. Again, not new. We're not reinventing the wheel. Wholesalers know your product stuff, but know more context to it. Know be as nimble as you can with all of the ways that it's competition, who else they're competing with what the advisor can invest in. So that's awesome. Well, Andrew, it's a pleasure as always. Whenever you want to partner, wherever you want to work together, you let us know. You're a friend of the podcast. So thank you for sharing your insights today. And thank you again to Cerulli.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for having me. And anyone working in a distribution team that's listening to this podcast, I'd love to engage with you, have you take our survey, which usually goes out in the spring to early summer. And that goes out to all members of distribution teams, all from heads of distribution, key accounts, wholesalers. Again, we just started surveying product and practice management specialists. And if you take that survey for us, you'll actually get a key findings from this report that goes well beyond some of the just brief tidbits that we hit on here. I'd love to have conversations with you, tell you what we're learning and focused on, hear what's on your mind. So please do not hesitate to engage with us. It's a two-way street, and I'm confident you'd find some value in taking our survey and getting access to results as a participation.
And if you're in the Boston area, Andrew and I both are. So we'll grab some coffee, grab a drink, whatever. You let us know. We'll do open office hours here for chatting about it.
Yeah, sounds great.
All righty. Well, have a great weekend, Andrew.
All right, thanks, Dan.